What happens when one of Hollywood's most outspoken stars faces a television host known for his tough, unfiltered questions? You're about to see, and it gets heated quickly. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment, because this exchange is something you'll want to talk about. That morning, Samuel L. Jackson walked into the Good Morning America studio expecting a straightforward promotional interview for his latest movie. The veteran actor, celebrated for his powerful screen presence and outspoken personality, had done countless press stops over his long career. But he hadn't anticipated George Stephanopoulos showing up in one of his most combative moods. The tension started even before cameras rolled. Backstage, Jackson overheard Stephanopoulos telling his producers he was tired of the same routine interviews and wanted to push harder this time. His voice carried a sharp edge, one his team knew meant conflict was coming. When Jackson sat down across from him, the atmosphere felt unusually stiff. The normal warm-up chatter was brief and formal. Stephanopoulos barely glanced up from his notes while adjusting his tie and earpiece. Even the crew seemed uneasy, exchanging looks as if they sensed this wasn't going to be a normal entertainment spot. "We're live in 30 seconds, the floor director called. That's when Stephanopoulos finally locked eyes with Jackson. The look wasn't friendly. It was clear this wouldn't be the casual discussion the actor had been promised. "Good morning, I'm George Stephanopoulos, and we're joined today by Samuel L. Jackson," the host began once they were live, his practiced smile not quite hiding the edge in his tone. "Samuel, thanks for being here to talk about your new film." "Good morning, George," Jackson answered calmly, leaning back in his chair with the same confidence that's made him a Hollywood icon. "Glad to be here," but Stephanopoulos wasted no time. "Before we get into the movie, I want to ask about some of your recent remarks on the industry. You've been outspoken on certain issues, but some are questioning whether you're the right person to make those criticisms." Jackson raised his eyebrows. This wasn't what producers had outlined. "Excuse me, what exactly are you referring to, George?" "Well," Stephanopoulos continued, "you've made strong claims about how the business operates, about fairness and representation. Yet, looking at your career, you've been one of the biggest beneficiaries of that same system. Isn't that contradictory?" The room went quiet except for the hum of the cameras. Jackson leaned forward, his voice steady but edged with warning. "George, you may want to explain that, because it sounds like you're suggesting I don't have the right to talk about issues I've personally dealt with." Stephanopoulos pushed on. "I'm just pointing out that for someone who's earned millions from this industry, complaining about it might seem a little inconsistent. You've starred in some of the most successful films ever made. How have you been disadvantaged?" Jackson's tone dropped, measured but firm. "Wait a second. Are you really saying that because I've had success, I should keep quiet about the problems I've seen? That making money means racism or bias suddenly doesn't exist?" The host shifted in his chair but didn't let go. "I'm not saying racism doesn't exist, Samuel. I'm suggesting that maybe someone who hasn't gained as much from the system would be a more credible voice," Stephanopoulos suggested. Jackson's jaw tensed, the cameras catching every flicker of his expression as his trademark intensity surfaced. "More credible, George? Let me make something clear. The fact that I've been successful doesn't erase the years I was typecast, told I was too much of this or not enough of that, or forced to watch less capable actors get roles because they fit a certain image. Success doesn't shield you from discrimination, it only gives you a stage to call it out." But Stephanopoulos pressed on, almost encouraged by Jackson's reaction. "Doesn't your career actually disprove your point? You're one of the highest-grossing actors in history, here today promoting another major release. Where exactly is the systemic oppression in that?" The question hung like a challenge. Jackson fixed his gaze on him, the silence thick enough for viewers to feel. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet weight. "George, I'll give you one chance to reconsider how you're framing this. Because right now, you sound like someone who's never had to fight for anything. You want to talk about my career? Let's talk about working twice as hard for half the credit in my first 2 decades. Let's talk about the scripts that reduced me to stereotypes. Let's talk about the meetings where I was told I was too intimidating, too urban, or whatever code word they wanted to use that week." Stephanopoulos leaned back, but his tone stayed sharp. "But isn't that history now? The industry's changed. You've been in award-winning projects, blockbuster franchises, Tarantino collaborations, Marvel films. Isn't that progress?" Jackson repeated, his voice rising just enough to shift the energy in the room. "Do you know how many times I was the only black actor on those multimillion-dollar sets? How many times people assumed I was crew or catering before realizing I was there to perform. Real progress isn't one person breaking through. It's dismantling barriers so others don't face the same. The host seemed to sense the interview slipping, but instead of pulling back, he went further. Samuel, with respect, you're starting to sound like someone searching for problems that don't exist anymore. Maybe the truth is some people just won't admit how much better things are now. That was the turning point. Jackson's eyes flashed with the same presence that made his most intimidating roles unforgettable. When he spoke, his tone was low but cutting. George, I suggest you choose your next words carefully, because you're about to cross a line you don't want to cross. But Stephanopoulos ignored the warning. Determined to make his mark, he leaned in. This is exactly my point. The moment you're challenged, you fall back on intimidation. Isn't that the kind of behavior that weakens your case? Jackson sat still, processing the remark. The studio was so quiet you could hear the air system overhead. Finally, he replied, his words sharp and deliberate. Intimidation. George, that wasn't a threat, it was a courtesy. A reminder you're supposed to be a professional journalist, not a tabloid host chasing a soundbite. Stephanopoulos flushed but kept going. I'm asking fair questions about your public comments. If you can't take the scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be making those comments at all. Scrutiny. Jackson let out a cold laugh. I've faced scrutiny longer than you've been reading off teleprompters. But there's a difference between real questions and what you're doing now, trying to dismiss my experiences because they don't fit your version of reality. The host leaned forward, sensing what he thought was an opening. Your experiences, or your agenda, because it seems like you're using your platform to push politics. And when challenged, you get defensive. That's when Jackson's composure cracked, just slightly, but enough for audiences to see the flash of real anger in his eyes. Politics. Equality isn't politics, George. It's a human right. But I guess you wouldn't understand that, sitting in your privileged seat, never wondering if you got a role or a job, because of merit or because you matched someone's idea of what that role should look like. Stephanopoulos bristled at the jab. Now hold on. I've worked hard to be here, and I won't accept the claim that I haven't earned my place. Oh, you don't appreciate that. Jackson's voice dripped with sarcasm. Well, imagine how I feel when you sit there implying that decades of my experiences with discrimination don't matter, just because I eventually found success despite them. The difference, George, is that I'm not questioning your right to have this job. I'm questioning whether you're competent at it. The tension in the studio was at its peak. Producers whispered frantically into headsets while camera operators zoomed in to catch every detail. This was no longer a routine interview. It had become something else entirely. My competence. Stephanopoulos' voice rose, his polished demeanor slipping. I've been doing this work for decades. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, Nobel Prize winners. I think I know how to conduct an interview. Jackson shook his head slowly, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. Interviewing presidents doesn't make you presidential, George. And right now, you're acting like someone who's never been told no, throwing a tantrum because your guest won't play along with your setup. Ambush. Stephanopoulos shot back. This is journalism. Public figures who make controversial statements get questioned. If you can't handle that, maybe stick to acting instead of publishing opinion pieces. The remark landed hard. Jackson's eyes narrowed, his voice controlled but sharp. Did you just tell me to stick to reading scripts? Did you really try to reduce me to some kind of performer who should be grateful for whatever scraps is given? Stephanopoulos realized he'd crossed a line, but pride kept him pushing. That's not what I meant, and you know it. I'm saying maybe entertainers should focus on entertainment instead of trying to act like political commentators. Entertainers, Jackson repeated, his voice rising. George, I'm not just an entertainer. I'm a citizen, a taxpayer, a human being with 5 decades of lived experience. But you want to box me into one label because it's easier to dismiss what I say if people think I have no right to say it. Sweat dotted the host's forehead despite the studio's air conditioning. Samuel, I think you're misinterpreting. I'm just trying to have an honest conversation about your remarks. Honest? Jackson laughed without humor. George, nothing about this is honest. You came in with an agenda, to frame me as the angry black man who doesn't know his place. Well, you got half of it right. I am angry, but not for the reasons you think. Stephanopoulos tried to regain control. Maybe we should shift back to your new film, which is why you're here. No, George, Jackson cut in firmly. You wanted this conversation, now we're having it. You want to know what makes me angry. Sitting across from someone who never had to fight for respect, never had to prove himself beyond the accident of his birth, trying to lecture me on how I should respond to discrimination. You want to know what privilege looks like? It's the belief you can decide whose experiences matter and whose don't. The studio was silent again, but this time it was shock, not anticipation. Stephanopoulos began to respond, but Jackson raised a hand. I'm not finished. You asked if I'm the right person to talk about these issues. Let me ask you, what makes you think you're the right person to tell me I'm not? The question landed like a punch. Stephanopoulos sank back slightly, finally realizing he was outmatched. Jackson, however, pressed forward. The host's controlled image was cracking, and the entire studio could see it. Samuel, I think you're twisting my intentions, Stephanopoulos said, his voice shakier now. I'm just asking what viewers want to know. Jackson's response was sharp and final. Your viewers tuned in to hear about a film, not to watch you try to humiliate your guest for ratings. But since you want to talk about what they want, here's my guess. They want to know why a supposed professional journalist thinks it's acceptable to ambush someone who came here in good faith. The host's face flushed with embarrassment and frustration. This isn't an ambush. It's journalism. Real journalism asks tough questions. Tough questions. Jackson's voice boomed, making the sound crew wince. You haven't asked a single tough question. You've made accusations. You've dismissed my experiences. You've tried to silence me. That's not journalism, George, that's bad television. Desperate, Stephanopoulos tried one last angle. Samuel, maybe you're just being too sensitive. If you'd simply answer instead of attacking me, we could actually have a productive conversation. That was the breaking point. Jackson pushed back his chair so suddenly it rolled away. The entire studio jumped at the movement as his imposing frame towered over the seated host, casting a shadow across him. Overly sensitive. Jackson's voice thundered now, filling every corner of the studio. George, for the last 10 minutes you've tried to tell me my experiences don't count, that my success cancels out my right to speak about injustice, and that I should just stay quiet and be grateful. And when I refuse to nod along, you call me overly sensitive. Stephanopoulos shrank back in his chair, finally realizing the scale of his mistake. Samuel, please, sit down. Let's try to have a civil conversation. Civil. Jackson's laugh was sharp, bitter. George, there's been nothing civil about your approach since the moment I sat here. You came in with a narrative designed to make me look bad. And now that it's backfiring, you're trying to hide behind civility. The host made another attempt to salvage things. I was only challenging your views, giving you a chance to defend them. Isn't that what good journalism is about? Jackson leaned forward, palms on the desk, his voice dropping to the low, dangerous whisper audiences around the world had heard in his most famous roles. George, here's the thing about challenging views. You engage with arguments, you bring counterpoints, you ask probing questions. What you don't do is attack someone's right to hold those views in the first place. Silence followed. Stephanopoulos sat frozen, unable to answer. Crew members looked away, visibly uncomfortable with the rising tension. Jackson straightened, adjusting his jacket with deliberate calm. And here's the real tragedy, George. You had one of the most respected actors in Hollywood across from you. Someone with decades of stories and insights your viewers would have valued. Instead, you chose to turn this into a cheap gotcha moment for your own ego. Stephanopoulos finally found his voice, though it cracked. Samuel, I think this has all been a misunderstanding. Maybe we can start fresh, talk about your film like we planned, start over. Jackson's eyebrows shot up. George, you can't unring a bell. You don't disrespect someone for 15 minutes and then ask for a do-over. That's not how respect works. Please, Samuel, the host begged. Let's salvage this. We can find some common ground. Jackson shook his head, disappointment clear in his face. Common ground. The only thing we share is being in this studio right now, and that's about to change. Stephanopoulos' eyes widened. Wait, you can't just leave. We're live, watch me, Jackson replied, his voice like a gavel. That's the difference, George. I don't have to sit here while someone disrespects me for morning TV ratings. I have enough self-respect to walk away. The host's mask of professionalism finally slipped, panic showing through. Samuel, think about this. In an hour this will be everywhere. Is this really how you want to be remembered at the edge of the set? Jackson paused and looked back one last time, George, after all these years, I know one thing. How I'm remembered depends on who tells the story. And when people see this, they'll remember the host who thought he could push Samuel L. Jackson and found out the hard way that some people don't play those games. With that, Jackson strode off the set, leaving Stephanopoulos sitting alone, mouth opening and closing wordlessly. The cameras lingered on his stunned expression until he finally whispered, "We'll be right back after this commercial break." Everyone watching knew Samuel L. Jackson was gone, and George Stephanopoulos would have to answer to his producers, his network, and his audience for how a routine promotional spot had unraveled so completely. The studio erupted in chaos. Producers rushed forward, crew members whispered in shock, and Stephanopoulos sat frozen at his desk, staring at the empty chair where Jackson had been, realizing the full weight of his mistake. So there you have it. That's what happens when preparation meets opportunity, and George Stephanopoulos was clearly unprepared to face one of Hollywood's most formidable voices. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Samuel L. Jackson